What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tell Me More podcast presented by the Real Estate Cheat Code. I have Jason Balara with us. He is with the Lark Capital Group, also a vet surgeon, as well as a podcast host, Know Your Why, which I was on recently. And I'm so excited to have you on, Jason, because we were just talking a little bit behind backstage there that I believe you are the first non-real estate agent that I have on my podcast. And so I'm a big believer that in a couple things. One, business is business, right? And I was asking you like, oh, you're a vet surgeon? Like, okay, cool. And you're like, yeah, it's pretty efficient, right? And I'm like, oh, I can definitely learn some systems and some things to, operate, my business. But, on this podcast, we're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And I'm excited to dive in, and that's where we'll definitely start. I always like to start the conversation with, growing up and what was life like for you. As I interview a lot of real estate agents and successful agents, usually there's a lot of things that happen early on in life or early in careers, whether it's childhood or college or early careers, that actually have a big impact on what they're currently doing. Yeah. And a lot of times we don't actually take time to stop and reflect on that, right? And actually dive into it. So I always like to start there. So for you, Jason, what was life like for you growing up?
Yeah. And thank you, John, for having me on. I'm really excited to talk today. And I completely agree that sort of our backstory is so relevant. Growing up for me, as you mentioned, I'm a vet surgeon. I'm also a real estate investor and honored to be the first non-agent. That's pretty cool. So I was that kid that loved animals, right? There's plenty of kids that love animals. There's a lot of young kids that say they're going to be a vet when they grow up. I just did it. And so I think a lot of people move on to other ideas. But also, the reason why real estate is so important to me is because we grew up, pretty poor, two kids with a single mom, and we moved a lot. And so we were always kind of in search of the next apartment that was maybe either more affordable or someplace that we could actually, feel safer to live in. And so I always saw, kind of real estate ownership as a way out of that. I think that got implanted in me at a young age. My grandparents lived in the same house my entire life. In fact, that's where when I was first born, that's where I lived, at my grandmother's house. And it was like, I would see us, moving effectively every year of my life until I was in high school. And then holidays, we would spend it at my grandparents' house. And it was always the same house, and it was their house. And it was like, those were my really fond childhood memories. And so I always, I loved animals. I loved the idea of real estate ownership. I didn't know it was called that, of course, then. But then I also, when I was a teenager, really, I started working for contractors. So I started, and of course at the time it's to make money, right? Lots of teenagers want a job. They want to have some of their own money. But that continued for me. And I realized I love construction. I love, taking something old and making it new again. And that extended to, when I bought my first house, I was, I think 25, bought, a fixer upper for like next to no money, definitely no down payment. This was before 2008. So they would give a loan to anybody. Yeah. And I just figured it out. And I was kind of really that sort of lifestyle and doing things with real estate ran in parallel with me becoming a veterinarian, going to college, vet school, and beyond as training as a surgeon. So it all tied in very much together. And depending on what stage of my life people have met me in, I have friends that think of me strictly as a veterinarian. I have friends that know I'm a guy that knows how to fix houses and now real estate. Yeah. So it's kind of a almost like a dual identity, I guess.
Yeah. It's, the real estate thing is a powerful thing. I moved around, not as much as you, but a little bit. I went to 3 different schools growing up, and so My parents were the ones that always bought the older homes, and not to flip them, but just projects to do, right?
Right.
They like to do things. And the reason I got into real estate was because of the investment side of it. That is really my main passion in real estate is the financial side that it can do for someone. When done right? You got to say when done, because there's a lot of people, and I know you've come across them, but there's a lot of people that believe, real estate investing is easy and that anyone can do it. And there's just all this money to be had and to be made. And that's not the case. Right. So for you, that first house kind of really, I don't want to say planted the seed, but kind of was that first stepping stone, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. And it was, the timing was good in terms of, that was sort of the previous bull run, again, before 2008. And it was, that house, I bought it for $99,000. I think I sold it for $250,000 5 years later. Like, it was crazy. And please don't think that I knew how to time a market or anything like that. It just happened to work out that way in my life. But it was like, I refinanced multiple times, like paid school debt, like things like that. I mean, did a lot with that house, learned a lot about using real estate to my advantage. And, now people talk about things like house hacking and the BRRRR strategy. And you hear about a lot of these strategies in real estate. House hacking is just having roommates. And I did that. I couldn't afford my mortgage on my own. I had roommates when I bought that house. Like, BRRRR strategy is living in a house, renovating it, and then refinancing it. Right. And so it's like, I did that because that's what you do. Those are great strategies for beginning real estate investors. Like, that's a good way to kick off. Like, if you can own a home and not pay any mortgage, or maybe you pay a little bit, or best case scenario, you're actually making a little bit money because you have people living with you. Like, those are huge opportunities.
I think that is something that is missing in today's market right now. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and the word affordability was very common, and Columbus was affordable. And now we're getting to that point where we're ready to take that next step in the stage of a city. And so things are, working their way to becoming not affordable for that first time home buyer. And I don't know what your thoughts are or your opinions on this, but since COVID, I think a lot of people saw friends, coworkers, and other family members go from renting a 2-bedroom apartment to owning in my market, right? The $500,000 house, which normally would be the third home that they buy. And because COVID and low rates, it became possible for it to be the first home that they bought. Right. Or the second home, right? And traditionally, what you said, right? Like, there were stepping stones that we took in order to get to that next phase of home ownership. And I feel like right now, the people that are getting into the market, the first time home buyers, they're not necessarily willing to make that sacrifice of having, quote unquote, the roommates, or, having, a sibling move in, or whatever the case may be, to help cover that payment. And so now there's this divide of like, well, if I can't get that, then I don't want it at all, type of thing. And I just think as a society, us getting back to this idea that owning a home is better than renting anything, in my opinion. Right. And there used to be 3 to 5 year plans. It's not a 15-year plan. And that's kind of what you saw and what you experienced with that first house. Was it always by design for it to be a 5-year plan for you?
No, I I was never really a planner. I do that a little bit better now, probably because I have kids. But yeah, no, for me, it was just, this is what I can make happen right now. And I certainly didn't know that was going to be a hot real estate time.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that the values were going to go up so much. And the funny thing is, like, so I want to say we sold it in 2005 or 2006, right? So the value of that house ultimately was less than what I sold it for, probably from like 2008 to 2012, or
Right.
for a chunk of time. And so real estate goes through cycles, but I just realized I wanted to own. There's nothing wrong with renting. Like now I own apartment buildings. I like it when people want to rent, but like you there are ways, like you mentioned, there are ways to get into home ownership outside of just like buying a super expensive house and having to be tied to that house and financially burdened because you bought that house. Like there are ways. It's not like a sexy way, nobody really wants to have a bunch of roommates. Like they'd love to own a fancy house with nobody else there, but like the reality is this is very doable, because if you think about it, like in terms of affordability, the price of homes go up, the price of renting is going to go up as
Yeah.
well. And so if you have a house that you can buy and your mortgage is, say your mortgage is $3,000 a month, and average rent in that area is like $1,200, $1,500 a month, and you can rent out 2 rooms in that house. Now that's paying your mortgage. You're saving all of that money. Oh, by the way, the house is building equity. Like this is where you can do some real, damage, if you will, in terms of getting yourself headed in the right direction financially.
Well, I think that's, the other thing too, when I said in the beginning, right, you got to buy right, right?
I mean,
You got to buy
yeah,
smart. I think a lot of times people get caught up on this, 30-year fix, I'm going to be stuck in this house. And I believe
yeah,
there's two different types of buyers out there. There's emotional buyers and there's equity buyers. And emotional buyers are going to be the buyers that will overspend because, the house feels like home, right?
right,
Because maybe it's updated or the paint is, a light gray, or, it's more light and airy in the house, right? An equity buyer is someone that will look past, a lot of those cosmetic things, and they'll put the
yeah,
sweat equity in and all of those things. And so if you buy right, you buy smart, you can be just as nimble, if not even more nimble than what you can if you're tied into a 12 or 24-month lease. Because a lot of
yep,
times
yep,
landlords aren't going to let you break out, terminate that lease early without some form of penalty. Whereas in real estate, you can really go and sell that house as long as you do it the right way. But Jason, I'm curious with you, on the real estate investing side, was that the igniter for you? Like after that, that first home, like walk me through when you decided to start really getting into the real estate investing.
mhm,
And then, talk to me about Lark Capital Group as well. I'm sure that's another iteration of your
yeah,
story.
yeah. And so that first house, um, I've done that, essentially that same strategy over and over again, right?
Mm,
So that was the first one. I actually moved out of that house and rented it for a year or two before I sold it. I actually bought a I'm from Massachusetts. I bought a 3-family in Boston, like always with the same idea. Like here again, the 3-family. I lived in one of the apartments and rented the other 2 apartments out. I actually made money every month. I didn't like I was getting more money in rent than had to pay in mortgage at the time, and just have continued to do that. My wife knows, like, I mean, we're pretty happy where we live now, but we renovated this house down to the studs. If we ever move, we will not buy a house that someone else did, right? We're going to either build from the ground the way that we want, or we're going to buy an old house that needs to be renovated and do it the way that we want to, because that that's how you create equity. So I did that through, from that first house throughout, and in 2020 was when Lark Capital started. And that started because a couple of reasons. One, it actually had nothing to do with the pandemic. I know that's what most people associate with 2020, but for me, that wasn't, obviously it was impactful to me, but it wasn't why Lark Capital was started. Really, the main thing was I had a 1-year-old son, at that point, and we had finished renovating the house we live in. So it was kind of like, okay, I don't have anything to sort of scratch my real estate itch with, and I, as a veterinary surgeon, the way it was then, I wasn't home a lot. I was on call. I was just, So I was realizing, like, I need to think of another way to create my life so that I'm there with my family. I don't want to miss things that my kids do, that sort of thing. So that's when I came across syndication, which is
Mm,
what we do with Lark Capital. And for uh, your listeners, if they don't know, syndication is essentially just the grouping of resources to purchase assets that are larger than typically one person purchases on their own. In my particular case, usually that means apartment buildings. But basically, you have sort of two sides of a syndication. You have the operators or the general partners, those are the people that purchase and kind of manage everything. And then you have the limited partners, who are the investors, and the investors get to get all of the benefits of that real estate without actually having to do any of the
mhm.
work. So there, and it goes back to, you talked about doing it right. You still have to find the right general partners to work with and all of that. But it's a good way to get involved in real estate, make money in real estate without actually having to be the one that's swinging a hammer, managing tenants, all of that. And so that was what kind of inspired Lark Capital, was finding out about syndication and seeing that as a way for me to remove myself from the OR in at least to some extent. I'm still doing surgery. We talked a little bit about that before recording, but it allows me to be much more in control of my time. Bear in mind, I'm not saying it lets me work less. I'm not saying it makes me so much richer. I'm just saying it allows me to create my life in a way that suits my, desire to spend time with my family. And, oh, by the way, it's building long-term wealth. So
Yeah.
that, there's different avenues to that, but that's kind of where Lark Capital was born out of. And that was in 2020.
I think, the real estate investing, a couple things, on that. I think a lot of people believe that, it's hands off. I don't care if it's even buy and holds and you're buying it, the house is already updated. It's a hands-on thing, right?
Yeah.
Passive income is used a lot with real estate investing, but it's not really passive. You're pretty active in all phases for the most part of real estate investing. And I think, the syndication piece of it, we're living in a time where there are a lot of people that actually have a lot of equity in their homes,
Mm-hmm.
like the idea or want to do the idea of real estate investing, but have no clue of even where to start.
Sure.
Right. And part of that is because some people don't have the funds, some people do have the funds, but you know, there are people out there that would rather just hand over, $50,000 and not necessarily have to touch the hammer, go walk the house, manage the contractors, all of that. So kind of walk me through, your how you built maybe, Lark Capital, because, raising funds and all of that can be a challenge, right? You,
Mm-hmm.
you, you got to
Yeah.
build trust and you got to have the results
Yeah.
and, all of those things. So for
Yeah.
maybe people that are listening, that are interested in real estate investing, but, they don't want to do, the get their hands dirty type. How does that work for you? How did you build that out?
Yeah. And you're right. Raising capital, having people have that willingness to invest right now is challenging, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, the headline reason is rates are up.
Hmm.
The reality is that they're actually probably like historically normal at this point. We were just in a extremely low rate environment prior to that, and it has caused some distress in the real estate market when it went from extremely low rates and everything went up quickly. But at the end of the day, the interest rate is one number in kind of what impacts an investment, and then so it's probably overstated in the
Yes.
importance of the actual interest rate. As a investor in a syndication, if I'm understanding the question correctly, as a limited partner, someone who's invested, and I hate the term limited partner because I think that implies that they're not important. All that means is limited liability. You're not actually not important to the deal. These syndications don't happen without investors. And so
Right.
it's a very important piece, and you get, the benefits, particularly, cash flow appreciation, tax benefits. I mean, those are the things that people talk about. But what happens, the process in the way that we built out Lark Capital is I actually built it in mind with the future in mind. And so the idea for me is that someday I will have created enough passive income streams that work will be optional. And that's what I think that is what I would propose should be the goal for anyone who's thinking about, sort of investing in real estate actively or passively, because at some point you want to be in control of your time. And so what happens is, when someone invests passively, they put their funds in, you mentioned $50,000. That is most commonly like the minimum investment. So that's a good number to use. They put it in. The general partners are sort of managing that investment. And you, of course, always want to build the relationship and build that trust with whichever general partners you decide to invest with. But ultimately, the idea is that money goes towards purchase or down payment on a purchase for a property. It goes towards the CapEx, it's called, or the renovation budget. It goes towards management expenses, things like that. And the ideally, you're going to get distributions along the way throughout the hold of that asset. And then when that asset sells, you get a chunk of that proceeds. And so in general, you like to look at, as a passive investor, you can double your money every 5 to 7 years. That's like sort of the rule of thumb. Like any investment, that might not always be true, right? You could have, a few years ago, people were doubling their money in 18 months. It was crazy with what was going on in the market. Now it's, a lot of people are on, their distributions might be paused. There are people in distress because of what happened with rates, and rates went up. And oh, by the way, also all expenses went up. So it became a challenging market. The good thing is now we're at a reset, right? So we can, if we learn from what just happened, we can recognize what are the sort of underlying problems of the distress that is present now, and use that in our information going forward. So I think I'm probably rambling a little bit, but just to give people an idea of kind of what the process is and where the challenges might be.
Now, are you guys just buying local to your area? You guys buying across the country? What's the plan?
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles, and I'm not against investing in Los Angeles or California. That I actually think that's another thing that gets overstated. People talk about you can't invest in California. There's lots and lots of people making money investing in California. It's a kind of I understand the challenges of California, but that's it. Every market will have challenges that you have to understand and get familiar with. So we focus on, for our multifamily properties, we focus on Atlanta. Atlanta's been the sort of market of choice thus far. We also have an asset in Phoenix, Arizona. I actually think those two markets I like them for the same reasons, I guess. They're not an identical market, but they're large cities with a lot of growth, but not like boom and bust cities. And they also have room for expansion out. So like new businesses, companies, things like that can come to those cities without, huge disruption to the space that's there. And it's happening. So I also like the Carolinas. I think, North and South Carolina are good investment opportunities. General people think about the Sun Belt as kind of the investor or the landlord friendly states. It's landlord friendly until it's not, right? So if you go into one of those markets and you expect one thing and then that doesn't happen, well, now you're in trouble. That's why I say, like, California people talk about all of the regulations and things like that, but you just know that going in, that it's right. There's rent control, there's things like that. So you base your strategy on that particular market. So there's just ways to approach it.
I was going to say strategy, that word, right? It's like, what is your, when I work with investors, so, I got in 2011 into real estate, selling real estate. And at that time, right? HGTV was popular, Flipping Boston, like those types of shows. And I'm like, oh man, like I can go make 75 grand if I flip a house. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but I thought, okay, well, let me go learn the real estate side first. And then I'll do the investing side. Right.
Yeah.
And because I got in 2011, I didn't know it back then, but now I do that. And I appreciate that time frame for me in my business and how it has impacted me. Is because I got to work with a lot of investors because we were selling off bank portfolios of foreclosures.
Right.
And so we had a portfolio of 120 to 130 homes that we were listing for the bank. And so that naturally just brought investors to you.
Right.
And every time I talk to my investors, I said, what type of investing do you want to do? It's a business model, right? Like some people won't touch, government housing. And I said, well, okay, cool. That's your philosophy. And there's other people that have made millions of dollars doing that,
Right.
and some people do buy and hold, and some people, buy, houses already fixed up and hold on to and just charge premium rents. And some want them, torn up. And so they can go fix it up and refinance it and do it that way. And so to me, I even think, my wife and I, right, we're buying some assets that didn't cash flow, but it was long-term equity play, right? We didn't need the cash flow monthly, but we knew those areas would grow with appreciation.
Yep.
And because it wasn't that we were going to sell it tomorrow, we have the time to allow some of those things to catch up. And I think that's where a lot of people, they go online and they hear all of the investors out there. And it's like, what is the best strategy for you and that property? Because property to property, that strategy could potentially change. So
100%.
I was gonna ask you, how do you, especially being across the country, how do you identify what makes sense for you to buy as far as an investment goes? What are some of your thoughts? What do you look for?
Yeah. And I think that, so I'll tell you my personal philosophy and strategies on this stuff, but also I think one of the first things, if someone's thinking about getting real estate, like the first thing, as you said, you have to figure out what the strategy is for you. The first thing to ask yourself is, do I want to be active or passive? Do I want to be, because yes, active real estate investing is not passive. It's another job, and you have to work at it to have success. For me, the way I sort of I guess identify opportunities, one is sticking with markets that I know and like. Atlanta has been where we've been for a few years now, and because of that, I have a team, boots on the ground. I have a lot of contacts and network there that I can access to find good opportunities. The other thing is expanding on that network in real estate investing, especially within syndication. There's a lot of partnering that goes on, and so you can partner with other operators, other groups that might have experience in different asset classes. They might have experience in different markets. So you can essentially piggyback on other people's, expertise and apply that to your investors as well. Specific strategy for us right now, what we actually have as our opportunity is a fund. And so within our fund, we're buying real estate, we're buying multifamily real estate, but we're also buying small businesses. And in reality, every commercial asset that you own is a business. You're running a business of renting apartments to people in that asset. The business aspect of this is looking at small businesses, because right now a lot of this is due to rates. Cash flow is not fantastic in the commercial real estate world, right? So if you look back 4 or 5 years, you were maybe getting cash on cash of 8 to 10% annually, and you might be getting an overall, again, I mentioned you might double your money in 2 years, 3 years, something like that. So it was a faster play, but that was all market driven. Now we're kind of on the flip side of that. So in our fund, we have our cash on cash currently is about 4.5%, which someone might say, well, I could put that money in a savings account, right, and get like a high yield savings account, get 4.5%. But that doesn't account for, what our investors are going to receive when that asset sells. My idea in putting businesses into the fund is that the businesses tend to be much higher cash flow, but maybe don't have the same appreciation in price, unless you really grow it, right? You can, if you can really increase the profitability of a business, then you'll be able to sell it for more. But the way I structured it is and the way I underwrote it is, sort of multifamily real estate underwritten as it stands right now today in current market, and then layering on the cash flow that we can receive from small businesses that are within the fund. And so it increases the returns that we can get by putting those two together. And so currently that's my strategy, and I shifted that just based on what the market was doing. So it's kind of, I think, being nimble and recognizing and learning from what has happened in the past, right? Like, things happened in 2008 that caused a real estate crash. It's not the same things that happened recently, but you have to recognize how important debt structure is. I think that's what I've realized is, and you could apply this to 2008, but the debt structure on any real estate deal it might be the most important thing there, because the lender is the biggest investor in that asset. Unless you're buying things with cash, right, the lender is the biggest investor in that asset. And so you have to understand that as that biggest investor, they've got a lot of control of what's going on. So you have to recognize that, and you sort of work accordingly to that, I think is maybe the biggest lesson learned over the last few years.
Where did you go? Do you pay for coaching? Did you have a mentor? Did you just learn it on your own? Every time I bring someone on, most successful people will say they had someone that was that mentor, or a coach or whatever. Did you have that, or did you just figure it out as you went?
Yeah, no, I've definitely had mentors, and done multiple mentorships. I started, my first mentor was Ellie Perlman with Blue Lake Capital, and we now partner together on deals. As I mentioned, like, that's kind of something that happens, is these are large assets. They're worth a lot of money. And so it's not uncommon for people to, kind of partner together on that. I've done another mentorship group, or I guess you could call it a mastermind group, on apartment investing with a focus on asset management. I recently just joined another mastermind and mentorship group with Cody Sanchez on buying businesses and managing businesses. And I think there are things that you could, like, sure, you could figure this out on your own, but it decreases that learning curve and cuts down on the number of mistakes that can happen by having mentorship. It's no different than anything else in life. Like, we think back to, people who are athletes and have coaches, people in school, you have teachers, like, you've had mentors throughout your life. In a lot of instances, as you get to adulthood, you might have to pay for those mentors, but you can also find organic mentorships. Like, if you're interested in getting into the business, especially if you're young, just go work for someone who's doing what you want to do, and you'll learn by doing. And it's like, I'm a huge fan of mentorship, and in whatever form it takes.
Yeah. And I always say free is currency, right? If you want to, if you want to go and learn something, offer your time. Yep. Right. Like, free is, you're going to learn so much just by giving your time, doing whatever it is. Most successful people will take you under their wing, will teach you, will show you, as long as you're giving them something. Right. And not always just giving them something in return, but, like, take something off their plate. Right. One less thing for them to worry about. And in return, right, they're going to pour into you their knowledge and everything that they know that you want to learn. And the second thing, I think that you mentioned was what I talk about in the real estate business is just model success. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, just copy and repeat, right? Like, duplicate it. If it's successful in Los Angeles, where you're at, or Atlanta, or, Chicago, or New York, it's going to be successful in Detroit, Dallas, right? Baltimore and any other city that is, that is near. So, Jason, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit because I know we got a couple minutes left. I want to talk to you about your podcast.
Sure.
Know your why. I want to understand why you got into podcasting to begin with.
Uh, I will say encouraged. Pushed was so I was terrified. I didn't actually want to have a podcast. I was, I'm definitely an introvert. I was very, very uncomfortable in the beginning. What I realized was I loved the conversations, like having, every guest, I'm at I think like 350 episodes recorded now. And it's like, I learned something every single time. Like I learned something from every guest. And I hope that whoever listens to the podcast is also, we're providing value and learning things. But yeah, it took some pushing in the beginning. I think I started the podcast in 2021, and I had, again, I mean, it goes back to mentorships, right? I had some friends I had met in the real estate space, and they encouraged me to do it. I think in a lot of reasons because it was kind of the thing to do in real estate. Like it's people talk about it as being like your business card. And so the other thing was still like a lot of things were shut down from COVID. So this was a way for me to network both as an introvert, but also like because things weren't open, you weren't able to meet with people in person. But it turned into something that I really enjoy. And like I said, I learned something all the time.
Now, the topic, the title, Know Your Why. I'm curious, why did you name the podcast that? I could, and the reason why I ask this is because when I talk to a lot of real estate agents, whether they're new to the business or even seasoned agents, the idea of what's your why comes up a lot. And a lot of times people struggle with that. And I don't know if that ties into your title or not, but I'm just curious, what was the purpose behind the title for your podcast?
So when in 2020, when I was, launching Lark Capital and really diving in on syndication, podcasts and books. That was like, all the time. If I was in the car, I was listening to the podcast. I was, or listening to a book or reading a book. And I noticed it came up, like people would ask on other podcasts, like, what's your why? But it was always kind of, maybe underplayed to like the strategy or the nuts and bolts or the whatever the that particular thing was. But I realized as I listened to them, that's what motivated me. That's what motivated me, was to hear like people's stories of coming from poverty, from addiction, from moving here from other countries, just like all the different things, or like people that have specific causes that they're passionate about. They're like, I always ask people on the podcast, that's one of the questions, what is your why? And it's like, people have talked about their dedication to stopping human trafficking. It's just like really, really impressive stuff. And I just realized that's what resonated with me. It's what resonated when I went to conferences and I would talk, there's, I don't know if you know who Joe Fairless is, but he's like one of the really big names in syndication. He has a book on it. He has his own sort of brand all around it. And he puts on a conference every year, and he gave his speech, and it was literally nothing about real estate. It was all about what real estate had provided him to do from an impact standpoint. And it was like, yeah, that's what I want. I want it to mean something. And so that's where the name of the podcast came from. I have every intention of someday having like a charitable foundation called the Know Your Why Foundation. Like so it has become so important to me. And I've realized, because it's become important to me, I use it. I use it when things are hard, and I think about my why, and I think about this is why I'm doing this, and stop feeling sorry for yourself and get up and do the work, that kind of thing. So it's like, it just became very meaningful for me. And it's been it's like I wondered when I started, I was like, is this going to lose its thing for me? Like, I was like, am I going to lose interest in this? I don't. I love hearing people's answer to that question every single time.
Yeah. Jason, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for coming on and just sharing your story, your journey, what you're doing, what you're building. Those that are watching down below on the screen, is Jason's Instagram handle. If you guys are interested in, I don't know if you're adding, I'm assuming you're always adding people to the syndication. I would assume.
Oh yeah. If anybody has any interest in, talking, investing, whatever I can help with, yeah, definitely reach out.
And if you want to be a guest on his podcast, make sure you reach out to him as well.
Exactly.
Just like, I did. And so, Jason, I know we've spoken twice in the last month and a half or whatever it's been. So I just appreciate you coming back on my show and sharing your story, your journey. But for those that are maybe listening in, what is the best way for someone to connect with you? Maybe just to pick your brain on investing, maybe to, partner with you, or, maybe just to, talk to you about, maybe they want to get that podcast started and they're also introverted or nervous or whatever the case may be. How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, social media is fine. You've got it down there at Lark Capital on Instagram. I'm Jason Balara on LinkedIn. You can find me. My name's not common, so you can Google my name and I'll be the only one. So that's easy. You can email me. It's jason@larkcapital.com. You can go to our website if you just, you don't want the commitment of actually speaking to me. Go to our website and check it out. It's larkcapital.com, and you can see kind of what we do and what we're about. And that way, from there, you can schedule the call if it's something that interests you. But yeah, I'm open to talking about any of it, any way I can help someone. I think to me that's a good chance to have that conversation.
Awesome. Again, Jason, thank you. I appreciate you, and let's stay connected, and we'll talk again here in the future.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.